If there's one thing that really saddens me about the modern games industry, it's that a lot of the phenomenal double and single A developers that put out killer after killer during the 90s and early 2000s kind of just fizzled out. Games have become much more expensive to produce, and so those companies just resort to re-releasing their older games to keep themselves afloat rather than making anything new. For me, there are two examples in particular that sting. The first is Game Arts, who, granted, kind of dropped off in quality hard after peaking in the 2000s. Still, they did keep making games afterwards, but then eventually stopped after 2012, only re-releasing the first two Grandia and Lunar games since. The other, though, is a studio who, ironically enough, did collaborate with Game Arts before. I'm talking about Treasure. These guys were absolutely legendary, with a focus on original games, and they constantly put out one unique game after another, dipping their toes into every genre under the sun. I mean, seriously, have you seen Stretch Panic? Their catalog is almost entirely composed of phenomenal games, with cult classics across the board. Sin and Punishment, Ikaruga, Mischief Makers to name a few. But unfortunately, starting in 2002, their output declined drastically. Not necessarily in quality, but just kind of in general. Their staff began to dwindle. I'm pretty sure nowadays they only have like 10 staff members left, and what few games they did release were either sequels or licensed. So eventually, people had to start making their own. One such person being Buster, a Japanese indie developer under the circle name Uturobune. This guy was out here in the mid-2000s making his very own Treasure games entirely by himself and releasing them for free onto the internet. Mind you, this was around the time where indie games as we know them now were first starting out, so they never really took off, remaining extremely niche to this day. So I've taken it upon myself to shed some light on them. The first of these games is Vacant Ark. Both it and the other game in this video were made with Enterbrain's Shooting T-Cool 95, or Shooter Maker 95 in English. For context, Enterbrain are the same people who make RPG Maker, aka the software used to make the most heinous porn games you've ever seen in your life. Except they've made a lot more than just that. Action Game Maker, Music Maker, Sound Novel Maker, Fighter Maker to name a few. And if you're thinking, wow, how come I've never seen any of these before? You probably have and just didn't know. For example, Dong Dong Never Die and Super Costume Wars Ultra were both made in 2D Fighter Maker. Shooter Maker was, as the name implies, explicitly made for shoot-em-ups. And I gotta say, Vacant Ark is one of the coolest I've ever played. Granted, I've not played many, but still. Basically, you play as a mermaid, and there is an evil mermaid you have to go kill. Right off the bat, you have 4 difficulty options. The first is Shallow, which is a tutorial mode essentially, and just ends after the first stage. The second is Middle, which is easy mode, Deep, which is normal mode, and Abyss, which is hard mode. But honestly, I feel like giving them such simple descriptors is kind of underselling it, as Deep and Abyss have straight up completely different mechanics. Let's get the basic ones out of the way first. Unlike traditional shmups, you don't just endlessly fire projectiles. Instead, you have a limited supply of 6 fish stones, which essentially function as ammo. Killing an enemy or destroying a projectile drops a single refill. However, you can still damage enemies without actually shooting them directly. See, there's 3 types of shots: Cannon, Riot, and Force. Cannon is your default attack, and goes in a straight line forward. It deals the most damage, so it's fantastic for bosses, but awful at crowd control. For that, you instead use Riot, which shoots out a weak but wide blast that deals with smaller enemies. And finally, we have Force, which is probably the most unique option. It creates a little shield immediately in front of you that does decent damage but has absolutely no range. However, it does have one major benefit over the other two. It can deflect bullets. On Shallow and Middle, this is basically completely irrelevant, so you can just pick your favorite weapon and stick to it. On Deep and Abyss though, enemies will start using attacks that can only be avoided by deflecting them, so swapping between your weapons effectively becomes crucial. All 3 weapons also come with their own option type, which is this little ship thingy that flies around your mermaid. The Cannon one stays directly in front of you, the Force one directly behind you, and the Riot one just goes all over the place. These have their own hitboxes and can erase bullets too, usually dropping more ammo, but their damage is generally middling. It leads to a really interesting back and forth that keeps you on the move all the time. Not only that, but it also forces you to make several quick risk versus reward decisions, as your ammo is more than just that, they're your health too. If you get hit with ammo on you, then you'll lose a fish stone instead of life. So even if you don't actively use it as an attack, you can still run out of it very quickly. Well, you get this weak little blast which is absolutely worthless against enemies and whose only purpose is to hit enemy bullets so you can get your fish stones back. Fish stones also add to your score, since collecting multiple in a row increases the multiplier. There's also extra lives you can find in stages for a total of 6, but if you run out of all of them, instant game over, back to the start. No checkpoints, no continues, no level select. You either do it all in one go on one CC, or you don't do it at all. And geez, this game is brutal. I mean sure, maybe if you're really good at shmups, then this is gonna be too easy for you, but as someone who could barely get through Sin and Punishment, let alone Alien Soldier, this game kicked my ass. Middle was already challenging to me and I could barely squeeze my way through Deep, but Abyss? Yeah, no, I'm not built for this kind of thing. And yet I still keep coming back and trying over and over. The core gameplay loop is fantastic and the bosses are really fun. Most of them actually reminded me of Gradius in particular, but but there is a lot of variety, and despite the game's short length, it remains extremely varied from start to finish. And all of this is helped by the fact that the visuals and music are fantastic. Buster absolutely nailed the treasure aesthetic, while also putting in a lot of his own visual flair, and if I didn't know any better, I never would have guessed that this was made in Shooter Maker of all things. This totally fits in right between Treasure's 16 and 32-bit catalog. As for the music, I believe it was made in Music Maker DX, which was unfortunately Enterbrain's final music production software. Every track is barely a minute long, but they're all very catchy, and they actually remind me a lot of Sci-Fi rather than any Treasure game. If you're a fan of shmups, then I cannot recommend this game enough. I'll attach a link to Buster's own blog site with download links to both games in the description. Even if you don't end up liking it, it's so short you won't exactly be wasting any time. On that note, let's talk about the other of those two games. Now, I like Vacant Ark, but Kitan Iwanaga I love. First off, unlike Vacant Ark, it actually has a story told through the manual. There's actually so much of it that covering it all by just listing it off wouldn't really do it any justice. So instead, in the description, I'll link a Google Doc containing a translated version of every lore entry in the manual, so you can read up on it on your own. It's genuinely really cool, and I do recommend reading it. As for the game itself, everything I said about the music and visuals still applies, except that now all has a much moodier tone, with a big emphasis on feudal Japanese instrumentation. The gameplay on the other hand? Well, imagine if Ikaruga and Alien Soldier had a crack baby, but like the cool kind of crack baby, not the, you know. Just like in Vacant Ark, there are multiple difficulties, this time simply labeled easy, normal, and hard, but don't let that fool you. These are basically 3 completely different games, with their own bosses and mechanics. Easy just gets rid of most of them, so we'll just pretend it doesn't exist and talk about normal and hard mode. Most of the footage will be on easy though, because I don't want to spoil just how cool some of the fights can get. This is also why I avoided showing anything past the end of shallow mode for Vacant Ark. This game absolutely deserves a playthrough. If you've ever played Alien Soldier, then you'll feel right at home with the game feel, as it's basically identical. For example, you've got its teleport dash, which you can use to dodge attacks and go invincible for a bit, and the more you attack, the more charge you build up. Once it's full, you can either dash or double jump to use what's essentially a screen nuke, and you can swap between multiple weapon types, though that locks you in place. As for what's different from Alien Soldier, well, you have an immediate double jump, as I mentioned earlier, which also has the dash's invincibility properties, but you also have the option to shift between being locked in place while aiming, or being able to slowly move around during it. You can also just tap the attack button instead of holding it down to use a melee attack like in Sin and Punishment, except here it's almost exclusively used to deflect enemy attacks. You only have 2 weapons in this game: Habaya, a fast shot that attacks exactly where you put the cursor, and Kaburaya, which fires slower projectiles into the direction of the cursor. Depending on which weapon you kill an enemy with, they drop a different recovery item. Red refills your health and blue your time. Obviously running out of health kills you, but if you run out of time on normal, it starts to drain your health instead. On hard it actually just flat out kills you though. And if you're wondering, on easy it does absolutely nothing. These things already make for a really engaging system that actively encourages switching weapons, but on normal and above, you get one more mechanic which makes this game really stand out: the mental strength gauge. Essentially, both weapons have 3 levels of attacks to them. On level 1 they do basically no damage, on level 2 they do a moderate amount, and on level 3 they do a lot. The more you use one weapon, the weaker it gradually gets, but the other one gets strengthened during that time. It forces you to consider which weapon should take priority in any given situation, and adds another risk-reward layer to them, where you might need to sacrifice time by using a weaker weapon to strengthen the more useful one for the current fight. And geez, I thought Vacant Ark was hard, but this game kicked my ass. Easy mode is manageable thanks to its simplified mechanics and significantly easier bosses, but normal does not fuck around. Everything is significantly more aggressive, and honestly, I'd recommend playing through the difficulties in order, starting with easy to get a feel for everything and then trying to get through normal. I still can't get through it consistently, truth be told, and I barely last 5 minutes on hard. I'd say this game is about as hard as Alien Soldier, but honestly, I think it's way harder because you get no continues. It doesn't even have a life's fallback system like Vacant Ark does. You die once and it's back to the very beginning for you. Everything is stacked against you, and it's not letting up. This is a game that fundamentally understands what makes Treasure's run and guns work so well, and decided to add its own spin on it along the way. I highly recommend this game to anybody who's fond of Treasure's gamography. It's free and it's really awesome, and my only problem with it is that you control everything with the keyboard. If you could move the cursor with the mouse, this game would be incredible. So, what's Buster been up to after releasing Iwanaga in 07? Well, at one point he seems to have been working on a sequel/remake type of thing for it titled Kitan Iwanaga, but unfortunately it never came out. All I could find was a single video showing it off, and it looks like it would have added some Sin and Punishment flavor into the mix. And man, I would have loved that. According to his fan box, which I'll link in the description, he seems to have been working on a 3D shmup named Mana Zareo for a while, but looks like he stopped cataloging development on it in 2021. On his Twitter, meanwhile, he seems to have been working on a mech action game until 2023, might even be the same one, though updates for that also stopped. About the only thing he seems to be doing other than that these days is recreating random songs in Enterbrain's Music Maker 3 for the PS1. At one point he even did the Sakura Wars 3 theme, so sure, you know what, go for it, dude. I really hope that he does go back to making games eventually, but at this rate I kind of doubt that. I've actually tried reaching out to him, but unfortunately I haven't received any response yet as of writing this video. And that's about all I had to say about the 2 games Buster seems to actually have finished. It's a shame he doesn't seem to have released anything since 2007. If I somehow end up being able to contact him, I'll most definitely be making a follow-up video on it. But until then, if you need something fresh to fill the treasure-shaped void left behind in 2014, then you can't find much better than these 2 games. With all of that said, I wish you all a wonderful morning, day, evening, or night. I need to go kill a goddess for being ugly. Cheers.
A giant enemy woman spider, bro. You fucking weeb.